Cop awaiting trial is on active duty in Chilliwack. Bus driver at fault in crash that killed 17 people will not face charges. Frank Stronach accused of more sexual assaults. Tax bill withdrawn in Kenya. Massive asset sell-off in oil and gas might be difficult. And Bolivia's 3-hour coup. Good morning. It's Thursday, June 27th. I'm Nora. Here are your headlines. We start this morning in the Fraser Valley, where a cop who is awaiting trial for 3 criminal charges related to shooting someone and who had been disciplined for a road rage incident is back on the job. The cop's name is Kevin Biagioni. He's a corporal with the Chilliwack Detachment, which is a higher rank than he had when he is alleged to have shot somebody. Lisa Stacey from CTV News reports that the RCMP wouldn't say how long Biagioni has been back at work, but he was promoted in February 2022. By then, he had already shot a suspect but had not yet been criminally charged. CTV was tipped off by people concerned that Biagioni might be working again. In particular, the victim of Biagioni's road rage incident saw that he was wearing a gun and a uniform and started asking questions about his professional status. He had been disciplined in that road rage incident that this person was involved with. While there are few details about the incident where Biagioni shot someone, Stacey reports that there is a civil claim against him by the man who's critically injured. The suit alleges that his hands were in the air and he was holding a shish kebab skewer when Biagioni shot him, quote-unquote, without warning. The man also said he was experiencing a mental health crisis at the time he was shot. Biagioni has rejected the allegations and replied saying that he knew it was just a skewer in the man's hands, but that he was justified in shooting him because he felt threatened. Next, the RCMP has decided not to lay charges against the driver of a bus who drove into the path of a truck, provoking an accident that killed 17 people. Brittany Hobson and Steve Lambert from the Canadian Press report that police have determined they won't be able to prove that the choice to drive into the path of the truck was criminal. This is the result of a year-long investigation into a crash that happened near Carberry, Manitoba. The minibus had 24 seniors aboard who were coming from Dauphin to go to a casino. The investigation showed that the bus driver was at fault, driving into the path of the truck. They also found that the bus had blind spots that likely played a role. The police also didn't believe that the driver would be convicted on a dangerous driving charge because, as the cops said, quote, momentary inattention does not constitute dangerous driving, unquote. Being inattentive for a moment and killing 17 people as a result is the definition of driving dangerously. But wait, what could that other factor be here in the police's decision to not charge the driver? Well, it isn't stated expressly, but the driver is not likely to not be white, as in he is likely white. Canadian courts are obviously less likely to convict a white driver for making a mistake, unlike, well, the driver of the truck that hit the Humboldt Broncos bus. That driver faces deportation after serving a jail sentence, after being found guilty, and after being charged. In this case, however, the driver was seriously injured as well, which is different than in the case of the Humboldt Broncos. But it sounds like the police have more than enough evidence to charge him, if they wanted to, with dangerous driving causing death, even if they couldn't interview him. Another difference between this crash and the Humboldt Broncos was that the families of the victims apparently accepted the decision of the police to not press charges. Of course, that would also be connected with who the driver was, someone who one family member said cared for the seniors like he was related to them. Except, I hope that isn't true. Anyway, it's terribly tragic and Canadian racism is on full display. Next, another story about how being a white guy can get you out of trouble. This, though, is compounded by also being outrageously rich. Frank Stronach is facing new charges for sexual assault. The auto parts magnate is now facing 13 charges. Some of the alleged assaults happened decades ago, but the most recent one allegedly happened in April 2023. Stronach is 91 years old. CTV News' Abby O'Brien reports that it's not clear how many more victims are represented by these charges. She has reached out to Peel Police to ask, because why would the police just tell us when they announced the charges in the first place? Stronach has been released on bail. Stronach has not been involved with Magna International, the company that he founded, since 2010. The company has distanced itself from the allegations. Now, the Globe and Mail published a piece from Jane Boone, who details what it was like being pushed into a situation where she, at 19 years old, had an awkward and uncomfortable sexual encounter with Stronach, who was 52 at the time. She writes this, quote, "What wasn't clear to me then, but which seems obvious now, is the infrastructure around Mr. Stronach helped sate his appetites. The fact that a teenaged co-op student spent that evening by his side didn't seem to raise an eyebrow. His assistant could offer me a night at the guest house. My glass, just like everyone else's, was always filled. The driver appearing at the end of the evening, ready to find and drive my car because I'd have too much to drink, was a pretty neat trick too. The 19-year-old me didn't stand a chance," unquote. Boone goes on to mention American men who rose to the levels of famous for their sexual assaults in her article, but she doesn't need to do this. She can stay in Canada. The Nygaards and Robert Millers of the world remind us that sexual assault in Canada goes hand in hand with power and wealth. The only real question is, how deep and wide does all of this go? Of course, Frank Stronach was a very close friend to Bill Davis, Ontario's longest-serving premier. Now to international news, and first a quick update from Kenya. William Ruto has said that he will withdraw the finance bill that has been the source of protests in that country. At least 22 people have been killed during the protests, Kenya's Human Rights Commission has said. Next, Reuters is reporting that after unprecedented mergers within the global oil and gas industry, some $27 billion in assets need to be dumped to fund investor payouts related to the mergers. There have been 6 deals worth a total of $180 billion since October. Reuters said that the mergers, quote, will unleash a burst of oil wells, pipelines, offshore fields, and infrastructure packages onto the market, unquote. Analysts expect that a lack of ready buyers suggests that there might be more assets changing hands rather than assets sold for cash. There are fewer private equity and international buyers interested in oil and gas assets. Energy stocks represent a third of their overall share of stocks at the S&P 500 that they were in 2011. Instead, tech stocks and healthcare stocks have exploded on the stock exchange. And finally, Bolivia has just endured a coup d'etat. Juan José Zuniga, the general commander of Bolivia's army, stormed the presidential palace today. Al Jazeera is reporting that a tank was used to slam into the palace doors. President Luis Arce stood up to the attempt and encouraged Bolivians to protest to protect their democracy. Zuniga stood down and urged soldiers to withdraw after a few hours. Zuniga has been arrested. Labor leaders called a general strike in support of Arce's government. Former President Evo Morales condemned the attempt and called for criminal charges against Zuniga and anyone else who helped him. Those are your headlines for Thursday, June 27th. I'm Nora. You are listening to this podcast at sandynora.com, on the Real News Network podcast feed, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Thanks to everybody that gets in touch with me about how much they love the daily news. I have to say, it is one of these things that I'm like, always asking myself, is it worth it? Is it worth the time? Is it worth the effort? Is it worth doing what I'm doing to get this to you all? And it always feels like when I'm questioning this the most, a message comes in from someone thanking me for the coverage that I'm doing. So thank you. Thank you for letting me know, and I appreciate it. And I hope you all have a beautiful Thursday.